Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 120th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. And in this video, I'd like to discuss, well, I didn't really know how to call this episode. I called it Perfect Sphere, and it'll be clear why I called it that later in the video. But it's again reflecting on the role that we play as human beings on this planet and in general in the evolution of the universe as a whole. So let's dig right into it. There's this interesting concept or philosophy or whatever we want to call it. It's called Indra's net. And that is that reality is actually just made up of a network of perfect spheres that reflect reality back at each other. And so reality is just sort of self-contained prison for light, where light just reflects and bounces off each sphere infinitely, never being able to escape that net, sort of curved onto itself. And so that's what's really powerful about a sphere, is that when it's perfect, it actually contains the whole. So every part contains the whole because it reflects the whole. The whole is reflected in the sphere. Now, the way you create a relative reality out of such a setup, an initial setup, is when you transform the sphere into an quote-unquote imperfect geometrical form, like a triangle or a square or, whatever else, like a pentagon or something. Because now light doesn't bounce off perfectly out of it. It sort of distorts light. And you can think of humans and all other forms that the universe created, whether it is animals, plants, rocks, anything that exists in this reality is an imperfect geometrical form or a perfect circle or sphere that has been shaped and twisted in order to reflect only part of reality. And so suddenly the all is not contained in every part, but every part contains only, part, obviously, of reality. And the whole idea of the universe is to return to the state of perfect spheres everywhere through the gradual process of rounding the edges, so to speak. Recreating the sphere out of these less perfect, quote-unquote, geometrical forms. And the experience of rounding these corners is what's interesting to consciousness, or to the evolution of the universe. It is the process of re-becoming that which you already were through the experience that is so interesting. Now, how is this related to us? As I've said, the universe is structured around key sort of building blocks. And these are these key geometrical forms. So, for instance, take the idea of the star or a sun. It is a building block which is between what bridges the worlds of physics and chemistry. But you see, if you change just a tiny little parameter in the way stars function, then maybe when they burst or when they explode, they will not manifest the same balance in chemical elements. or maybe they will produce some chemical elements and not others, which means that once planets are formed, these planets do not include the correct mix or the correct proportions of chemical elements in order to create life. And so you see that the parameters or the template, the design, the way that a star functions is absolutely key. Any slight deviation out of the way that stars function as a template, as a building block, affects all the layers that depend on that building block afterwards, and maybe some of these will not be able to exist or manifest. And so if you tweak the rules here of the star, you affect all the layers above. Suddenly planets, like if you evolve, quote unquote, if the star evolves, then planets evolve as a consequence. And if planets evolve, then life can be created. And life is created, then all kinds of, things that are alive can now evolve as well, like ants, whatever, insects, animals, humans, everything. And of course, I'm saying this because the star is one of those key elements. The planets are basically just a quote-unquote evolved star. But then life, a living cell, is the bridge between chemistry and biology, as you know. Chemistry within, biology without. That is, biology is just harmonious chemistry, and chemistry is just harmonious physics, or is created via harmonious physics, and then that creates chemistry. And you get the picture. And so humans are, of course, the bridge between biology and what I call the world of ideas. But why is this important? Because ultimately, the way that we function as humans, the ideas that we manage to reconcile within us, is going to affect the way that the world of ideas is going to explore itself. Just like the rules or whatever, the states of evolution of the star affect all the layers above. And so it's as if the universe goes through cycles of creating humanoid species that are in a physical or material, more or less, reality, and that serve as the bridge between biology and the world of ideas, and then it tries to evolve the humanoid form. Thank you for the software, I'll update it later. The humanoid form, and creating a planet which is made up of humans that sort of link up together to form a meta, consciousness or something. Basically a being that emerges from the harmonious interaction of parts, which is one human being, a cell, in that kind of meta being. And if you have like societies or civilizations of like a million humanoid cells, let's call them cells or parts, they reach harmony. But maybe like if you have like, this is like a big bubble, like infinity is this, just think about it as a huge infinite bubble. And then this humanoid network is able, via its harmonious functioning and the way that it has been able to sort of integrate various ideas in a balanced and harmonious way, then it is capable of exploring a chunk of all that exists within infinity. And so let's say that this is what can be explored by Pleiadians, for instance. And here's a chunk of infinity that overlaps with the Pleiadians in some respect, that is Arcturians. Arcturians. And then you have a part of a chunk of infinity that can be explored by reptilians, for instance. And it all depends on the configuration of that network and the kind of ideas that it is able to sort of host within it. And it's the same basically as, just think of like an animal is able of exploring part of infinity via its five senses, via the way that it interacts with reality. That experience is, just being able to explore a tiny fraction of what exists in the all. And the same with like an ant has a unique experience in terms of the way that it explores infinity. And of course, the animal experience, for instance, is a whole group here where they more or less overlap, between tigers and cows and whatnot. And the whole idea is to try to push the boundaries of this the furthest possible. But the further you push them, the more difficult it becomes. Because in order to create coherence between 1 million humanoid beings, it's a bit easier than to create a coherent whole out of 7 billion humanoid beings. But the possibilities afforded by such a diverse network of 7 billion is much richer than that of a smaller network. And the power over reality also is completely different. Everything is different. And so if you look at the evolution of biology, for instance, if you had like the first sort of medusa or mollusks and stuff, their experience of reality is tiny compared to the richness and experience of reality of human beings. With our interface, we can manage to explore a whole lot more. And at some point, this reaches a sort of a boundary, a fixed boundary of the maximum that you can actually experience within biology, within a certain, let's call them like a stage in the development of the universe and what you can experience. Like you have these levels, there's only so much you can experience with physics in the universe. You cannot have planets. You have to have chemistry for having planets. And so there's like infinity tries to push the boundaries, and in order to move beyond those boundaries, then it needs to create new networks, new just bring new higher forms of consciousnesses into this reality via the network of certain parts, harmonious interaction of certain parts that can explore bigger chunks of infinity that are as of yet unexplored and that are inaccessible to the parts being separate, as separate entities. The being that we are cells of will be able to explore chunks of infinity which would have forever been unattainable or inaccessible for us if we maintain our illusion of separateness and being disconnected and not functioning as a global kind of unit. Of course, it's not a functioning which is in a subservient kind of manner, like our cells obeying our every command. It is more what is emerging now with the Web3 revolution, where you have decentralized networks emerging between people that emerge spontaneously, and they create a kind of coherence which is bottom up and not top down. And that is very magical because it's resting on and respecting human free will as a fundamental building block, but it creates systems like Web3 where a million people exercising their free will can still create something that is coherent without the need for a kind of a pyramidal structure to forcefully create coherence out of free will, because of free will. And that is thanks to the evolution of human consciousness. If you tried to create decentralized networks 1,000 years ago, given the level of consciousness that humanity was at that time, it would have amounted to chaos. Of course it would have. Hence the pyramidal structure, which forces a sort of coherence because of the difficulty to create coherence out of free will. And so you have like systems like religions, for instance, which you can see that they've definitely created coherence out of humanity. Even science also is kind of a pyramidal structure where you have the empirical method or the scientific method on top as a kind of a Bible. And then that creates coherence because everybody's applying the same kind of methodology for interrogating reality. And so it's the methodology that is now replaced the Bible. And that creates coherence. And now, thanks to Web3, you can create these networks which are free-flowing, where you can have multiple networks where you have human beings in them, and maybe some links between those networks. And humans can freely switch and go from one network to the other if they so wish, without the whole drama associated with that kind of shift. Like if you suddenly change religion today from being a Christian to being a Buddhist, for instance, or from being a Buddhist to going back to science, or from being a scientist back to religion, of course, some people may not understand. Some people may still judge you for doing so. But there are very little places left on the planet where you will be burned at the stakes for leaving a network and joining another human network. And that trend is accelerating. And with that kind of setup, that is the way that you create a harmonious coherence between units which now have free will, as opposed to our cells, which do not really have free will. There's still kind of a mechanism for creating coherence out of cells which, left to themselves, if they were still behaving like unicellular organisms, they would fight with each other. But your body manages to create that kind of harmony and coherence where certain parts of your body, like for instance the microbiome that lives in your gut, if you just displace them to some other part in your body, it would wreak havoc. And so your body is that kind of intelligence which knows how to arrange parts in order to create coherence out of parts which, just arranged in another fashion, would create something very disharmonious or something chaotic. And so basically what the hope of the universe is for us is the more ideas we manage to balance within us, the wider the bubble that we will be able to experience. And so it's this idea of the sphere. The rounder and more perfect the sphere, the better it will reflect the universe back to itself and allow the universe to know itself for what it really is, as opposed to being an imperfect geometrical form which deforms or distorts what the universe really is. And so I'll give you an example which is pretty easy to understand. Like the living cell is neutral in the sense that it doesn't judge whether it whether it's part of a murder or whether it's part of a saint, well, it keeps the body of a murderer or a saint alive regardless. It doesn't suddenly say, oh, I'm going to stop functioning for the murderer because he's bad, and I'm going to, kill his body and turn against him. The living cell is just this template or this building block which allows for an extremely rich experimentation between, this game of cat and mouse, predator prey, monkeys, dinosaurs, plants. I mean, the diversity of ideas or forms or light, basically, living light, that can experience itself through the living cell is amazing. And of course, it's not perfect yet because the living cell does not, as of now, create the possibility for unicorns and dragons to experience themselves, at least not to my knowledge. But you understand that the more balanced and neutral the living cell is, the more kind of spherical it is, in a metaphorical sense, the richer or the wider the bubble within infinity that it can explore, that consciousness can explore itself through, the universe can experience itself through. So if the living cell was being very judgmental and saying, well, actually, I just want plants. I don't want to manifest animals and all that's really messy. I just want plants. That's it. That's all that I want. Well, consciousness will only be able to explore itself via plants. And then if the cell sort of evolves and then encompasses more possibilities, then it can start exploring itself as animals, and infinity starts knowing itself more and more. And that is what we are trying to do as humans, is the universe is trying to see just how many ideas, just how many things we can reconcile as humans, and we can make our peace with, whether it's war, for instance, right now with Russia and Ukraine, or whether it's this idea of pandemics and governments. And I mean, there's so many ideas that we're being torn as humans today about. Torn about racism, torn about sexism, torn about dictatorships and whatnot. All of these things are attempts at seeing if a human network can actually swallow up those ideas and digest them and be able to interact with them in a harmonious way in order for the universe to start experimenting itself in a new kind of realm, in the realm of ideas, which is rich, very, very rich, and where humans are just the kind of neutral template via which the universe can then experience itself. So imagine if, like, humans basically achieve harmony at some point on the planet, then that network between humans can manifest, can be a building block for Star Wars to exist, Star Trek, all of your sci-fi movies basically can then experience themselves via the building block of humanity behaving like one global collective organism. Just like the first living cell sort of divided into two and then into four, and then it started having interactions with itself, quote unquote, and then via that interaction with itself, it created a new entire experience. So imagine humanity as a template, just a template where, like, at some point you just freeze time, and humanity is a template that is being copied over and like a timeline that just bottlenecks, that goes from like plenty of different possibilities here through this bottleneck where humanity functions as one and then splits into an infinite number of parallel timelines where humanity explores the galaxy and does genetic manipulations on itself and then becomes reptilians, or does something completely different and decides that they will actually, start living on the planet Earth as stewards of the planet and not interested in space travel, or and just anything you can think of. But the precondition for experiencing all those potential futures is for us to find the kind of finishing touches for the rules that enable us to function as one collective global organism. And it's as if there was just only one star in the entire universe, just this one idea of the star. And then it fractalized into an infinite number of billions and billions of numbers of individual stars, which each had their own kind of features, but they're all based on a template. And it's that same idea that humanity behaving as one global collective organism is just a template evolving. Like you could say that, for instance, today the Pleiadians, they are the result of a quote-unquote older template of a humanoid civilization reaching harmony. And they're somewhere here on that timeline. But if you make that template evolve, then the entire universe evolves as a consequence, because now the template is upgraded. And it's the same applies to your bodies. If, for instance, now the living cell evolves and updates itself and becomes, I don't know, like there's new genetic information or it acquires new powers or whatever, then the entire set of biology is upgraded, including your own bodies. And now you can do new things. You have new powers, new healing powers or whatever. Because the template was upgraded, and that upgrades everything. And actually that is what's happening, because as I've said before in my other videos, the universe, there's no reason why infinity would explore itself in a sequential way, in an orderly fashion going from past to future. It's more like it's star, life, humans, and then conscious planet, basically, and solar systems becoming conscious. And all of these ideas evolve at the same time outwards. And if you create then a new timeline here, where this is the past now and this is the future, then what happens here between the star and life has evolved also from what it used to be, because now this template has evolved and now life can now be more complex or whatever, you can add more things, you can do more things. And so it's this idea of the universe sort of focusing back on itself, where it's almost as if this Indra's net, every single point in that net, in that network, like if you start with triangles, every single triangle sort of rounds itself more and more simultaneously. And each triangle, sort of the fact that one triangle sort of becomes more and more round, influences other triangles to become more and more round, until you reach that state where everything is a sphere again, a perfect sphere. And then the universe is itself in every single part. Like every single part contains the whole. And you're back to the original sort of design or template. So I hope this was clear, and I hope you sort of have a new kind of fresh perspective on what is happening today to humanity. It's harder and harder to create coherence out of these larger networks. But 7 billion people, with the diversity that we have as humanity, functioning in harmony, will be able to explore so much more of infinity than past civilizations because of the richness of the human network and human imagination. And you can see it when you read our novels, our stories, our movies, our music, everything. Compared to, I mean, if you just listen to other channelers and, I mean, just listen to Matthias de Stefano, how he describes other civilizations. From the point of view of certain, like the soul, it's basically a boring experience because everything is so well planned and designed and it's so orderly and you have much less free will. It's as if you had, again, that bubble of infinity and you had the choice between exploring a tiny little part that is self-contained, or if you had a potential of exploring a huge chunk of infinity, which is as of yet unexplored, but the boundaries are still fuzzy because the network of humans, human creatures, is not stable yet enough to explore it in a stable, coherent, and continuous sort of manner. Well, everything, of course, has meaning, but you might think that this experience is actually much more interesting in a way. This is more like, your tried and true experience. And here, this is the exciting, venturing into the unknown kind of experience. So basically, I'm wondering just how many ideas we'll be able to reconcile with this network of humanity, and just how round we will be in terms of reflecting the universe back to itself. And that's also why it's so important to heal yourself and work on that non-duality kind of thinking. Because that's what we're bringing to the universe. That's what we're bringing to the table. The ability to reconcile things that may have not been able to be reconciled before. And that's what secures and cements this experience. Like the duality between good and evil, war and peace, and good guys, bad guys, true and false, and all of these different things. If we manage to reconcile all of that, that is all that is being asked of us. And if we don't manage to do it, it's kind of like, oh, too bad. Now that we have to, there's part of that experience that is not going to be able to happen because humans didn't manage to reconcile this one idea. And therefore, it's almost like if, the living cell didn't manage to reconcile some chemical imbalances within it. And lizards, for instance, all reptiles would not be able to experience themselves because of this imbalance in chemistry within the living cell. And of course, it's not like it's catastrophic, but it's just a lost opportunity. And I think that there's a whole lot of hope and excitement from the entire universe looking at our sort of consciousness bubble. Like here, you could say that these are advanced civilizations like ETs that are looking at our template, our civilization reaching that template and being able to upgrade that template. And they're really hoping for us doing a really good job, because that will affect them in turn, of course, because they're made up of that template. So I hope you found that interesting. Hope it was clear. If you have any questions, again, feel free to ask, and talk to you in the next video.